Thank you very much. I think I'm filling in for Ambassador Gopinath Pillai because it's rather strange for a speaker to also moderate the question and answer session, but I'm happy to do that. I think we have had a series of very interesting presentations, mine accepted. But I think a lot of questions have been raised, not only about the elections as an event, but what these elections really mean in terms of both India's past as well as its future. I think a lot of questions would have risen in the mind of members of our audience, and here is your chance to question and interrogate the speakers who have been with us throughout this afternoon. So, any questions? Yes, please. Please make your question short, and if you have any particular member of the panel who you would like to address the question to, please also indicate that.
My name is Feroz Khan. I'm practicing accountant and known as a social service person, running a school in India, in hometown. I am from Chidambaram's constituency, Sivaram. I enjoyed the last speaker's speech because she opens her heart without thinking of whether to tell this or tell that. The truth has come out of the mouth. I enjoyed the lot. But what I want to express here or share my opinion. As a person lived in 33 years in India and living here for 30 years, I can always compare India and Singapore. The root cause of all evil in Singapore is corruption. A single thing if you can go for, research for, you will find out the corruption. But if you continue to tolerate the corruption, and you talk about everything else. For example, now recently we see the land price, a cent for 1 lakh, now 1 crore, 100 times increase. How people can buy? All these move to the politicians.
Excuse me, are you talking about Singapore or are you talking about
India?
I think you mentioned Singapore. Anyway.
No,
but I think why don't you ask your question so that
okay. I have a lot of questions now. I have read always this Ravi Velu's article. I think he is from Kerala. I understand. It's okay. Since you told me not to ask many questions, I think I want to talk to Ravi Velu separately sometime and make him understand certain things. He talked of the first Muslim terrorist from Kerala. I think I regret that he used such a term. Hitler is not model for Christian.
I think.
No, I want to tell you, he can choose words in such a way. He is an anti-Muslim. That's all.
Okay, I think you can privately have that conversation with him. If you don't have a question, I think we.
No, I just a simple comment. As I told you, I was born in India, and I compare these about 50 years. When I was born, the water level was 10 feet, now 400 feet. Trees disappeared. Agricultural land, wetland become dry land. And water reservoirs have been closed. People construct buildings and they talk about development. They talk only about currency and buildings, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, I think there was no question in that comment. Any other question? And please, I think, please resist the temptation of making long comments. I think the panel members would be very happy to answer any queries that you have, but the comments can be reserved for later. Any questions? Please.
Thank you for all your presentations. My name is Prerna and I used to be a former Al Jazeera correspondent in Delhi, reporting out of India. My question is actually for Dr. Subbarao because I recently interacted with some of the RBI former colleagues of yours And one of the big discussions that is going on right now is that if Mr. Modi does come into power, the present governor's job might be in jeopardy. From your experience, how do you sort of ease this pressure, this nexus between politicians and you as neutral officials or bureaucrats? And perhaps this could be expanded to the rest of the panel as well, because for me it's very worrying and very disconcerting that something like that is actually possible, that you can actually influence appointments, reappointments, transfers, etc. And that's coming to what Shoma was also talking about us having a very mature political democracy and yet not being able to see that growth trickle down to the very marginalized.
Okay,
Thank you for that question. First, on the specific question about whether Governor Rajan will be shifted or whether he'll be asked to be involved, I think that's entirely a media hype. I don't think anyone responsible has even said anything substantive about the RBI governor being replaced. I think it's just sensational and it's slowly picked up a momentum of its own. That's hype. The most substantive question about the institutional position of the governor of the Reserve Bank vis-a-vis the political missionary in Delhi and the democratic setup. You have to understand that this is not unique to India. Across countries, across the advanced economies, emerging economies, developing economies, there is always the tension between the government, especially the Ministry of Finance, and the central bank. Mr. Chidambaram himself said as much, that the government is for growth and the central bank is for inflation control. That's a neat, stylized caricature which I don't agree with, but at least he was intellectually honest enough to agree that that is the difference. And I think that's value-adding, that there is that difference between the government and the central bank is value-adding, because the autonomy of the central bank principle is that it must be a political institution that takes a long-term view, has concerns that may not materialize in the democratic structure, has a long-term view beyond the political cycle, juxtaposed to a government that is has a short-term democratic electoral cycle in view. But what the Reserve, this is my last comment, what the Reserve Bank and what central banks around the world must recognize is that they're making public policy that has an enormous impact on lives of people, everyday people. But they're not elected officials, they're appointed officials. So they have to be sensitive to that fact that they're not elected, they're appointed, and they're making policy for hundreds of millions of people. In the case of India, they have to be, in that sense, sensitive to the accountability that they have to render for larger public good.
Thank you very much. The larger question which was raised about the change in some of the professional positions with the change in government. Is that something that any of you would like to respond to? Okay. Yes, please.
My name is Chaudhary. I'm a principal fellow at the Institute of South Asian Studies, and I come from Bangladesh. I should begin by congratulating each one of you for excellent presentations, I think, and I've enjoyed myself enormously. I have a credit, though. It's not just the Indians who are watching the elections in India. It's being watched with equal interest by those in the periphery of India, the non-Indian South Asia. This is the question aimed at anyone in the panel, but including you, Mr. Moderator, and this is largely your forte. How, if we had to extrapolate, and this is what I do from what I've heard this afternoon, that there is going to be a Modi government. I'm not certain it will be Modi led, but there will be a Modi government. In which case, what would be the ramifications for the neighboring countries, in particular Pakistan and Bangladesh? That's all.
difficult for me to speculate on what precisely Modi government would do. But my experience tells me that there is been historically a great deal of continuity with respect to Indian foreign policy. And even if there has been some rhetorical flourishes which seem to suggest that there may be some shifts, when any government gets down to the business of governing India, gets down to the business of running India's foreign policy, it finds that its room for maneuver is not actually as expansive as it might have believed it to be. There are certain ground realities which change only slowly. What I think is very clear as a trend is that for the last many years, particularly since India opened up, economic reforms, liberalization, there is a sense now in India that any prospect for a larger Indian regional role or even a global role for India is not possible without, in fact, having a very, very stable and also prosperous periphery that you talk about, that we call neighborhood. So that is a reality. And I think the advantage that India has, if it plays its cards right, is that as a very large country surrounded by relatively smaller countries, a size of India which sometimes is seen as a kind of disadvantage because of the anxieties that it generates amongst its smaller countries. But here, the very size of India, the dynamism of its economy, the openness of its economy can actually become a growth driver for the rest of the neighborhood. If we are able to overcome some of the political, psychological barriers that exist in bringing that vision to life, I think the prospects for the future are very good, not only for India, but for the neighborhood. And I include in that both our relations with Bangladesh, but also with Pakistan. And you would have seen statements by Mr. Modi that he would like to encourage, he would like to promote much better economic and trade relations with neighbors, including with Pakistan. So I'm optimistic in that sense. Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Jayanta. I'm actually in from a group which actually comes out of the infrastructure projects in our and back in India. Looking at very appreciative forum on the rise, let's have an very, which I feel will be very well advice I can find anyone related to the corporate leaders. Though we know that the subcontinent has its own constraints, it is still looked upon by the world as the major growth factor. And we see many other times, as one of you quoted, the something issue, the corporate leaders who are entering into the markets are being sandwiched between the local status and the globalizations, which require us to enter into the market of the subcontinent. So are there any specific conditions or specific ideas which you think that are being missed out by the corporate leaders, which is making them put into a disadvantage of getting sandwiched into situations where they are not really able to come out with the cherish which they are entering into the market?
Would anyone like to take that first? Mr. Ram?
I sincerely feel, I don't think there's anything which is really being missed out. But unfortunately, what seems to have happened is that there's been too much of talk and advocacy of the way business is conducted in India. And that's been a perception which has gone awry. People tend to believe that there is only a certain way that big business can be done in India, and you can do that. And it's not of recent origin. It started right from the days we remember of Enron, when they entered. There was a PPP or a joint venture, as you call it, and it was a global Rambo, and And they thought that purely on its political connections, Enron would be able to carry the deal forward. Things kept going wrong, because the fundamentals were wrong. We had a repeat of that. If you take a company like Telenor, which is Norwegian, very good company, very well run company, very ethical in all its operations, but unfortunately it was prevailed upon to believe that if they wanted to enter the Indian market for telecom in a big way, there was only a simple way of doing it. And unfortunately, those opinions originated from India, and that's why we had so much talk in India about what is known as crony capitalism. So I think the perceptions have been wrong. Now the kind of business leaders who are emerging, and I'm saying this in the experience of having talked to Gen Next kind of business leaders in Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, Chennai, etc., they would rather play straight. They would rather await their turn rather than take shortcuts and then not be sustainable.
Is the perception entirely wrong?
Pardon me?
Is the perception?
No, I didn't say the perception was entirely wrong. I said the perception given was that's the only way you can do business. And unfortunately, it's gone wrong. So hopefully, any such opinion emanating now will be subject to certain changes.
The media, how does the Modi have impact on this?
Sorry, what did you ask?
Very specific to the media, how does the Modi-Nehru impact this on the corporate leaders?
You know, as I was saying, that I think the inadequacy of the media is that even as this is perhaps the first time that we have seen this scale of a presidential, it's really a personality-based election, that we have been unable to engender or leverage conversations about their political ideas, The reason Arvind Kejriwal sort of went up in smoke, though I still believe that he's played an important role as a kind of creative disruption, was this absolute fating of Arvind Kejriwal without knowing what his ideology was about. It was not a cohesive idea. To just be anti-corruption is to have a Noah's Ark, I mean, what does he really feel about FDI, about foreign policy, about, as I said, corporate citizenship, about the use of natural resources? We don't know any of those ideas. And similarly about Narendra Modi, as I think Manu pointed out, there is this perception that he's business friendly. Is he market friendly or is he certain company friendly? We don't know. And as I was trying to point out, that there is this missing piece in the conversation, and after watching him non-stop on the media for almost 2 years now, or 1.5 years, I don't know the depth of any of his ideas, And it's interesting when we talk about the Gujarat model. I don't want to take away his successes. Certainly, I think he has cut out petty corruption. He has been able to show decisive leadership, and we do need all of that. But there are many, there is a kind of idealization of the Gujarat model that does not bear out scrutiny. And the thing is that to bring up all that is to fight a billboard with a PhD thesis, You really, I think Advani was right when he said he's the best event manager that there ever existed. And it's very hard to take on the drama of that with small statistics about female feticide or about malnutrition or the hemoglobin count of the women in his state, or indeed whether he has set up educational institutes or created new health institutes. But what I find most interesting and disturbing is that if you really look at Gujarat, what is the new entrepreneurship that Mr. Modi has engendered? It is still the old heavy polluting industries, barring bringing the nano factory, which was a very high media event, and the few other manufacturing units that have come after that. I don't see any new entrepreneurship that Mr. Modi has engendered. We still have, heavy chemical industries. We have, the gas companies there. We have sort of pollutant industries, the old industries, resource intensive, water intensive. So, barring giving Mr. Adani the right to create a world-class port, I do not see the great creativity that he has engendered, and I'd be interested to see it. I am certainly seen as an adversary of Mr. Modi, but I am willing to concede the things that he does do right. It's just that I don't know the depth of his ideas on anything. Like somebody asked the question on foreign policy. The media has been unable to refract those conversations. Every day on television, we see this like 9-hour debate on a fleeting comment that some, RSVP leader and then Shehzade and then, immaterial things. You don't know what any of these political leaders stand for. And that is the failure of the media. So what we're going to get is a very untested leader on the national landscape.
Yes, please. Surya. Sorry. Okay. You want?
My name is Lena Pinsler. I'm a lawyer in private practice, and I'm also a professor at NUS. This question pertains to Mr. Rai, but I think it could be answered by anyone else. Mr. Rai, your partner and you rose to superstar status a couple of years ago with all the high-profile scandals that you brought to light. I think there was hardly anything more you could have done to actually deal with some of these issues. How do you think then that what you did contributed to the popularity or otherwise of other leaders in India who were against corruption?
Sorry, I didn't get the last one. How did you?
How do you think your work and the public face that we brought to this problem that existed in corporate India, how do you think that actually perhaps contributed to the Arvind Kejriwals and others who then brought up the issue of corruption in India?
Okay, see, let me say that it's not the scams or anything that we were interested in bringing out, but it's a very simple issue. When the Auditor General prepares an audit report and he plugs it in Parliament, does it mean full stop to that study? Does it mean that once that study has been done, it's been put in Parliament, he forgets about it? Because a large amount of hard work goes into the preparation of the report. What happens in Parliament is that these reports get automatically sent to the Public Accounts Committee. They are supposed to be discussed and debated. 165 reports go into Parliament every year. Public Accounts Committee, at best, if it has to meet annually, it meets about 20 to 25 times. They get to examine 10 reports. If they are very hard working, they will examine 20 reports. What happens to the other reports? They just get sent to the departments concerned. Full stop. It's RIP as far as those reports are concerned. Now, what is the mandate of the auditor, number one? Number two, what is the citizens' calling on these kind of reports? Is it not a part of the auditor's job that the reports or observations made by the auditor on social sector issues, say water, health, rural employment, rural agriculture, rural infrastructure creation, pollution, etc., should it not the ultimate stakeholder know about these things? Now, what happened was, well, we did these reports, we did them in non-Sarkari style, if I can say so. When the reports were interesting to read with graphs and charts and things like that. And the assistance was not, the initiative was not entirely ours, it was 24/7 media that we have in India. The unfortunate part of it was that too many of these reports came together, large issues. And that's why they got the kind of hype or got highlighted. Well, I don't say that everything was going wrong, but yes, the way government was conducting business in those sectors certainly was good. So I don't think we've taken away, stolen anybody's thunder, at the same time put out anybody in bad light. But we sincerely believe that the public deserve to know that monies taken from them as revenue were being spent on something which was not either proper or not effective.
Mr. Rai, I think the further question was that the work that you did as CA, did that bring the issue of corruption as a very major part of the political discourse and the election?
Yeah, see, as I said, there was so much of churning going on. this added to it certainly because it brought into public domain irregularities which were occurring at the government level. So whatever journey was going on, we got documentary evidence to further whatever arguments that we had.
Okay. So yeah. Sorry. Okay. I think there's a further.
So I think your question also needs a media perspective. I believe in. I think Mr. Rai was being very modest. I think it played an extraordinary role in highlighting corruption and contributing to many streams, which finally became this massive anti-corruption movement. Also, at a reporter level, there are many stories that journalists want to do, but the editorial management does not allow many journalists to pursue corporate stories. To some extent, you can highlight the corruption in the government, but if corporations are involved, because most of them are huge advertisers, it complicates it. So that is why journalists love the CAG. Now suddenly you are leaning on a giant institution, then you can say anything you want because you have that report. Now that's why Kejriwal also was important in the beginning. Many things that journalists wanted to say, Kejriwal was saying it for them, and they just had to put Kejriwal said it, you know. And that went on for a few weeks. So yes, CAG definitely, huge contribution.
Is that this question, Mr. Rai, I think one of the most important things also that Mr. Rai's interventions engendered was not just a conversation about corruption, but about the judicious use of natural resources and taking away discretion from that and perhaps looking at auctioning as the transparent way. But I think another question has arisen from that, which is that auctioning itself is also not the last answer. And, for instance, we are talking about Mr. Modi, for instance. I would love to know what he thinks about the use of natural resources, and say Mr. Mukesh Ambani's, the Tuji Basin sort of controversy, and the fact that costs are being gold-plated, and even after you auction something, the terms of engagement keep changing after the auction process is done, and that allows for fresh political corporate nexus. And I think these are the really big, crucial questions that are not discussed, which then create crisis further down, because we are not interested in having clarity on these issues, and the media is very derelict in pushing on those questions and on only focusing on the sensation for the moment. To my mind, I think these are the really big questions which I don't think I know what any of our political leaders feel. And as long as we have some really good institutional heads like Mr. Rai and others, the country will be kept safe.
Okay. One word in favor of the auditor. May I? Just 60 seconds. We never recommended auction as a panacea. No. Whether it was the telecom issue, where the government itself switched from first come, first serve in 2008 to an auction process in 2010, much before our report had come in. It was a government decision. In the coal issue, it was the Secretary Coal himself who was recommending auctions. So as far as the auditor is concerned, we never provided policy prescriptions. All that we said was, whatever process you are following, whatever policy formulation that you're doing, please ensure that there is a transparent process.
Okay. Surya?
Surya from ISIS. This is a question. Surya from ISIS. This is a question addressed to Ambassador Shyam, Dr. Narayan and Dr. Sivaram. This has something to do with the role and the place of states in India today, in domestic politics and also in foreign policy. The creation of Telangana against the wishes of the majority of people in Andhra Pradesh, what does that mean for federalism in India going forward? Is that a positive thing or a negative factor? In foreign policy, as you know, Tamil Nadu, one border state, and West Bengal, the other border state, are often blamed as acting as drag on the elbow room of the center in its neighborhood diplomacy. At the same time, the two Punjabs on either side of India and Pakistan divide are sometimes seen as potential friendly neighbors in economic terms, and therefore potentially a factor for the good in Indian foreign policy. And also we have the spectacle of 2 American presidents visiting Andhra Pradesh because of its emerging profile as an IT powerhouse. So the question is, do you think states should be stakeholders in foreign policy going forward? Thank you.
I think you must understand that the Tamil issue is actually a Tamil Nadu issue. Okay? It reflects in the politics of the state. It reflects in the, I would say, caste composition of the electorate. And certainly the government of Tamil Nadu will be very sensitive towards this. Should it be accepted as a national problem? But I think if you look at the Tamil issue in particular, I think the centre has been fairly ambivalent about this issue, and that is Tamil Nadu's curse. So it is not a question of whether the state should have a say in foreign policy, but I think a state has a right to expect the centre to be entirely transparent about the way in which it conducts the foreign policy.
Well, I think just to add to what has already been said, I think in a country like India, where you have a number of border states, to expect that those states will not also have a stake in how you follow your neighborhood policy is, I think, unrealistic. So, in following successful policies with respect to neighbors, you need to consult, you need to take on board states whose interests may be important. Even Mr. Nehru, if you remember, used to write letters to the chief ministers about foreign policy issues. Why? Because he recognized that with respect to having a consensus on foreign policy, it was important to take the state chief ministers, the states, as stakeholders. So, with respect to what may have happened with Tamil Nadu or with what may have happened with respect to Bangladesh, if you ask me, I would ascribe it to a failure on the part of the government of the day to really explain itself to the state government, perhaps spell out what are the risks, what are the benefits, because only through that process of consultation, and a consultation not just at the bureaucratic level, but a consultation at the political level, that is what is necessary if you wish to have a successful labour policy. Yes, please.
Good evening. I have a question which anybody could answer. I see Mr. Modi as a very decisive leader, apart from many people calling him divisive. I also see him posing up to a lot of oligarchs in the country. I see him as a nationalist, and I also see him who has yet to develop relations with the United States of America. My question is the world going to see another Vladimir Putin in Mr. Modi?
I think we will wait and see. Yes, please. Any other question?
One of the columnists in the Times of India had preempted you, and he wrote a column saying that Mr. Modi is not a Putin. So I think there's already that debate has already started.
That Mr. Modi is not a Putin.
Yes.
So that
may be reassuring to some people.
There's something to the analysis. But I don't think Mr. Modi level of basis.
Okay. Any other question? Please.
Hi, my question is directed to Mr. Radha Banal.
well. This is in the context of the massive infrastructure deficit. You both referred to the role of public-private partnerships that are definitely needed. And you spoke, as a memorial phrase, the inability to separate projects from promoters, as well as things going out to long bidders and very high leverage. Could you elaborate a bit on why there's such huge gaps in effective PPP implementation, and whether, in your experience, you have observed any significant differences across states?
I think the basic issue was that we really didn't have any particular precedent or experience with large contracts of this kind. Essentially, a PPP partnership is a PPP process, is a contractual process. It means laying out every possible contingency and scenario and state of the environment and what each partner has to do in each of these states. So when you design contracts without a full understanding of what these contingencies are, there are many loopholes. For example, in the Delhi airport, which is actually supposedly one of the most successful ones, there were controversies over the sharing of revenues, and how those revenues were channelized would really determine what share the promoter gave to the airport's authorities, the public partner. So if you channelize them through direct airport revenues, they were 46% share. If you channelize them through real estate development, it wasn't very clear. So then you started to do it that way. So loopholes, unplugged holes in the contracts, I think were a very fundamental reason for the breakdown in trust. The expressway, the Gurgaon Expressway, is another example of trust having broken down. So I think we needed to learn how to design these contracts. It was an inevitable learning process. And we should have then allowed for this process to be gone through. But in that period, because of the financial burdens that materialized, execution capabilities were limited, all of these things compounded to just widen the gap rather than narrowing it. And as a consequence, I think we do not have, my view is that we do not have any alternative to a much more direct and much more significant role of the state here. Because this combination is not yet at a point where the nature of these contracts is fully understood. Maybe another 10 years, maybe another 15 years we'll have it, but we have to work our way through the process. I don't think it's so much of a state-specific thing, although you can probably see some differences. I think it is more sector-specific, and the kinds of contractual loopholes that certain sectors are subject to relative to others. Power is the classic example. It's my favorite example, where you had our best record ever of putting up generation capacity. The former power minister, now the home minister, at least for the next few days, once said that we will be power sufficient by 2012. And if you just go by capacity, we probably will. But then somebody forgot to ensure that the coal that was needed to fire those, to fuel those, wasn't a part of that package. So we have the capacity, but we don't have the coal. That sort of leads to all kinds of breakdowns, spillovers into finance, spillovers into other things. So I think there is the network aspects of infrastructure simply have not been fully understood. What this means for contracts has not been understood, and that's the learning process I think we have to accelerate over the next few years. But we also, in the meantime, have to ensure that there's that the state does play a constructive role in this process.
Well, basically, our experience showed that, infrastructure projects are large investment projects. Gestation period is very large. Profits begin to commence to accrue over a longer time frame. And in India, we didn't have a sophisticated financial sector which could take out these people after the investments had been made. Large number of companies jumped into it, thinking that they would be able to make killing for themselves out of it. They obviously got stuck in large number of very basic issues, and they jumped into it on the assumption assumed that post-approval of contracts, they would get a huge amount of concessions, which did actually happen also. But then those did not really meet with the expectations, and that's why we have infrastructure. Large number of companies, in fact, which have emanated from Hyderabad, and they are in difficulties these days. So it's a question of the concession agreement being a tight concession agreement being drawn up, which is fair to both the parties, the government and the contractor, so that the interests of both parties are well protected.
Okay, thank you. I have time for only 2 questions. I think you wanted to ask a question, and I think gentleman there, you wanted to ask. Yeah. Please.
I'm Steve from Channel Association International Desk. Can you hear?
Yeah.
Okay. Exigencies of my job make me more than a casual observer of India, but in that way, I'm like many looking at India, and I have made a couple of documentaries and stuff. And for instance, rights of women, what's happened, the rape going on in India, just take that as one, like microcosm of one issue. When you ask questions and you analyze things like this in India, you get the same argument again and again and again that, look, we have the laws in place, for instance, dowries banned 60 plus years ago, yet they still haven't. We have the legalese in place, but we don't have the enforcement structure. Okay, now, any casual observer in India, when you start to ask questions, even I get really frustrated with this somehow like a disconnect, or as Ms. Chowdhury said, maybe a design defect between the legalese drawn up to protect Indian citizens and the lack of protection that we seem to have. And this is what the world outside looking in on this election, that's on their agenda, as they watch what goes forward. Do any of you have any optimism that enforcement can become a real action in India for stuff like children working, for the rape cases, for children growing up disabled and disfigured due to walking through active pools? Do you have any optimism going forward after this election that things might change?
I think before I ask any of the panel members to respond, there was one more question. Yes?
Okay, my question goes back to the elections. My name is Anand. I work for the UAVP Global Center for Public Service Excellence in Singapore. I used to be with UAVP India. Election finance was often discussed because there's a lot of corruption happening in campaign financing. I was wondering whether there was any change in this particular election campaign that could be related back to the anti-corruption movement. Has there been any significant difference in the discussion in the media, or have there been changes made in the big parties? And what is the hope for the future that this might have some impact and that we will essentially at some point clean up politics first and thereby also reflect back on the administrative part of government?
Question about campaign finance. You want to ask a question? Yeah, the very last one. Yes, please. No.
Chairman, thank you very much. My name is Isaac. I'm just a lay person, sir. First and foremost, you regard with respect to each and every presenter. Due to the limitation, I'll confine myself to, because I was allowed one question, so I have a joint question for Dr. Rao and Vishwa, if you don't mind. Vishwa. Now, first and foremost, I thank you for enlightening us with your persuasive, eloquent appeal with regard to the theory for reality. And for Dr. Rao, for example, knowing you beforehand, I would like you to affirm your position, because in the context of the rule of physics is clear cut, but the rule of politics seems to be otherwise. But you fall short of, in your final prescription, that you think that the new leaders should consider your proposition. But how are you to be sure that those guys are listening to you or your message do get across? The question is that it looks to me
Okay, the very last question. Yeah, please. Yes, we can hear you.
Which would be the ideal coalition for working towards improving the security of women in the country? Hello? Yeah. Dr. Sen, which would be the ideal coalition for improving the security of women in the country? And for Mr. Joseph and Ms. Chaudhary, from your experiences and conversations on the ground, how much do you think the electorate has actually awoken? How much is it just reacting to media reports and its voting, and how much do they really have an in-depth knowledge about the issues they should be knowing about?
Okay, I think we have a good set of last questions. Shoma, perhaps could you respond to some of the issues raised about the sense of insecurity amongst women in the country, the fact that the legal system, the police system does not seem to be able to really provide the kind of security that citizens of India demand, and what is the way out?
Speaking for myself, I think the beauty and difficulty of India is that everything you say about it, the opposite is true, and so even as we constantly are pessimistic about India, what I would like to say is that despite all the surface pessimisms, I'm actually very optimistic about India, because it's an extremely complex country, and I think we often forget the many victories of these last 60-odd years. And like I said earlier, that the language of democracy and entitlement and rights and awareness has seeped down to the ground. On the issue of women, I think we're going through a really historic churn, and it goes back again to the absolutely glorious vision of our constitution, which overnight gave adult suffrage to every citizen in India without discrimination. And the slow fruits of that is coming, is bearing fruition now. There is a kind of economic empowerment that is going on. I think more women are working in India now than any time in the history of the civilization. And with economic empowerment, the natural codicil of that is self-assertion. And so I think that there are many tiny rebellions, unrecorded, that are happening in the small kasbahs and houses and over, daughters and brothers and fathers, that is slowly changing the dynamic of sexual politics in India. Speaking for myself, the post-Nirbhaya rape protests did disturb me a lot, because I felt that it was very shrill, very punitive-driven, a desire for capital punishment. I believe that the strength of the feminist movements is that it is deeply democratic, committed to dialogue, the idea of nuance, proportion and complexity. And the disturbing aspects of the feminist discourse in India today is that it is very right-wing, very desirous of immediate punitive measures, and also, when you speak to the older feminist movements, of course they needed desires for revenge, but they have slowly come to the position that the bodily harm done unto you, you would not want done unto others, and it is very rooted in the idea of civil liberties. Now those things have got slightly sacrificed because of the shrillness and the, I would say, infantilism of the media. But having said all that, I think in all this noise are the small rebellions and changes that are happening. Because these are such polarizing discussions, I think a lot of discussions are happening, and I think those are very, very positive developments. Insofar as enforcement goes, I really think these things are more about social change than legal enforcement. You spoke of the dowry law. I have spoken to very, very veteran activists who believe that the dowry law is being misused. Almost 50% cases of dowry cases of people in jail today are actually misuse of that law, But as I said, the opposite is also true, that I do believe that the first step for social change is legal enactments. Because if you don't have those legal enactments, then how can you access justice, you know? But merely enacting a law doesn't ensure social change. So it's a dialogic process, and I think India is in a very, in the balance, and affirmative dialogic process is constantly going on. We forget, even as we are disturbed and upset with how much caste dominates our politics, we forget how many people have been empowered through the instrument of caste politics. There's so many groups that have come out of the oppressions of history and are power lobbies now. So it's an ongoing process, you know, and I think in time and in decades, we will achieve the victories. And finally, you asked about conscience as common sense. I think you've put that really well. You know, for me, as I said, I keep not wanting to be typecast as a bleeding heart, because I look at it as economic conversations and as common sense, because they will blow up in your face again and again unless you incorporate it into your macro planning. You know, I think if I just like to reiterate that it is human material. Economies are about human material, and how can you discount the human aspect of your economic planning, you know, when ultimately you're going to be playing it out on a human landscape, you know.
I think we have really run out of time. So thank you very much. Number one, all our panelists who have very patiently not only made their presentations, but have also answered all your questions, some very difficult questions to answer, including the one about Putin. And thank you all for patiently sitting through these presentations. And I hope you have had a good time with us. Thank you.